still remember the first time he pushed me against the wall and wrapped his hands around my neck.
He looked straight into my eyes and hissed, "This is not how things are gonna go down. You want a ring so bad. I bought you your damn ring."
It was supposed to be a surprise on your birthday. But I'm telling you now.
I come from a family of strong women. My dad was a traveling salesman, so he was gone all week and only came home on weekends. I grew up with this huge empty space where a father figure should have been. My mom was the one who kept our world together, the backbone of everything. She raised us, paid the bills, handled it all. But at some point, my dad fell into depression and started drinking heavily. Home got tense. He was quick to anger, quick to slam a door or raise his voice. I spent my teenage years tiptoeing around that tension. When you grow up like that, it sticks to you. You start confusing chaos with love. You learn to accept aggression as part of someone caring for you. I didn't see it back then, but that's exactly what I carried into my relationships. One day, I was sitting on the couch in our little apartment. He was standing over me yelling, and it was like my dad's voice all over again, but this time, from the man I thought I'd build my future with. He screamed, "Just because I didn't finish college, you think you're better than me? You and your degrees, you think you're smarter?" It was exactly what my dad used to shout at my mom whenever they'd fight. That moment cracked something wide open inside me. I realized I was trying to save my father all over again, forgiving every insult, every slap of disrespect, thinking I could fix him when I couldn't even say goodbye before my dad died of a heart attack. I'd given this man all my dreams, just like I'd done as a girl, believing I could fix broken men. But the truth was, I couldn't fix him, and I couldn't fix my dad. Still, back then, I didn't leave. I stayed. I told myself he'd change. He always knew the words I wanted to hear, promises of family, of loyalty, of some warm future that never arrived. He was the guy who showed up with flowers and wine, playing our favorite songs, acting like we were living some fairy tale. He did all the right things at first. If he said he'd bring me coffee the next morning, the coffee would be there. If he promised he'd quit drinking, he'd stop for months until the cracks showed up again. Then the mask would slip, and I'd feel the old cold fear. But by then, I'd already moved so many pieces of my life around him, I thought leaving was impossible. That night, he pinned me to the wall. I looked at his eyes so full of rage, and a voice inside me whispered, "This is not love. This is not what you deserve." But I wasn't ready to listen yet. I grew up believing I was independent. Everyone who knew me would say, "Oh, Emily's always been so strong, so sure of herself." I was 37 when I met him. I'd built a solid career in Chicago, had my own place, made good money. But deep down, I still dreamed of the one thing I'd never had, a family that felt whole. A husband, kids, Sunday dinners, that's what I wanted more than any promotion or big city paycheck. We met on a dating app. The timing was perfect, or so I thought. I was just wrapping up a fling with someone who'd never really been serious about me, so when he showed up, he said all the right things. He told me, "My mom lives way down in Georgia. Your family's back in Ohio. It's Mother's Day. We don't have to be alone. Let's go get lunch, just you and me." So we did. Sitting across that table, hearing him talk about wanting kids, a house, working hard now so we could move someplace quieter later, it felt like looking in a mirror. He wanted everything I wanted, or so he said. I fell fast. We met in May, started officially dating by early June. It took him 3 dates to ask me to be his girlfriend. It was all so quick, so intense. He kept showing up with flowers, little gifts, planning dinners. He always knew how to make me feel special at first. I remember I was about to take a vacation with some friends I'd already planned before we met. When I got back, he was waiting at his apartment with a huge bouquet, wine, a fancy charcuterie board, and John Mayer playing in the background. He knew exactly how to paint the picture. Romantic, thoughtful, reliable. But underneath that perfect image, the cracks were already forming. I'd been burned before, so I kept telling myself, just give it time. Let's see if he really means what he says. And for a while, he did. He'd say things like, "Babe, do you think there's anything I should change? I just want to be the best man for you." Who wouldn't fall for that? He asked for my opinion, made me feel like my voice mattered. He'd stay sober for months to prove he could. He met my family back in Ohio. They liked him, or at least they seemed to. Looking back, I see how subtle the control was at first. He'd say my red lipstick didn't suit me. You look better without it. Trust me. He'd ask me to change clothes before going out with his friends. You look prettier in jeans, babe. It didn't sound like an order. It sounded like he cared, like he wanted me to look my best for him. And I believed it. Because when you've grown up around men who shout and break things, a man who whispers his demands feels almost gentle. He told me he loved me every day. That was enough. For a while. By that first Christmas, he started drinking again. It was so subtle at first, just a beer with dinner, a glass of whiskey at a friend's party. But soon enough, the old pattern showed up. I'd catch him at bars after work, ignoring my calls, and every time he'd have an excuse. Rough day, babe. Just needed to clear my head. One night stands out so clearly. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. He called me, slurring his words. He'd stopped at a dive bar near his job. He begged me to come pick him up. So there I was, after a full day at work, driving across the city to scoop up my drunk boyfriend like a lost kid. I got him home, laid him on the couch. His phone buzzed with a message from a woman. You seem extra excited tonight, it read. My stomach dropped. He'd given me all his passwords when we started dating, his way of proving he had nothing to hide. I opened the thread and found photos, flirty messages, plans to meet up at that same bar. When I confronted him the next morning, he swore it was nothing. He said, I wanted her to meet my buddy, he's single. Why would I call you to pick me up if I was cheating? Use your head. I remember standing there nodding, telling myself it made sense even though it didn't. I wanted so badly to believe the man I loved wasn't lying to my face. A few weeks later, I caught him texting her again. This time, I didn't just swallow it down. I told him to pack up and leave. He called me dramatic, said I was just like all the other women, always suspicious, never trusting. But that time, I held my ground. We broke up for 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were torture. I questioned myself every day. Was I overreacting? Was it really cheating? Maybe I pushed him away. So when he came back with flowers, sweet words, promises of counseling, I let him in. He said, let's get a place together. It'll fix everything. A fresh start. And so we signed a lease on a tiny 2-bedroom in a nicer part of town. The rent was high, but he promised, we'll build our life here. We'll get engaged, maybe even start trying for a baby next year. I clung to that dream like a lifeline. Looking back now, I see the pattern so clearly, the cycle of hurt, blame, and honeymoon. He'd mess up, beg forgiveness, paint a new vision of our future, and I'd buy in every time because I needed to believe it would be different. The night before we moved in together, we were supposed to pack. He never showed up. He didn't answer his phone. Turns out he was at a friend's house, grilling and drinking, pretending our life together didn't exist. I remember sitting alone in my half-empty apartment, wondering if this was my punishment for wanting too much. But even then, I couldn't walk away. He came back the next day, full of apologies and excuses. He always had just enough sweetness to keep me hooked, just enough poison to make me forget it was poison. I moved into that apartment alone. He'd already moved his stuff in weeks before, but when moving day came, he was nowhere to be found. He said lifting boxes might hurt his back, that it could mess up his work. So there I was, carrying my clothes, my plants, my dog's bed all by myself. I remember the guy from the moving truck looked at me with pity. Aren't you moving in with your fiance? He asked. I just smiled and lied. Yeah, he's busy today, but it's fine. It wasn't fine. But lying was easier than admitting I'd gotten this deep with someone who couldn't even bother to help me start our so-called dream life. Once I was settled, there were brief moments that felt like hope. We'd spend nights drinking cheap wine on the balcony, planning our future, talking about a wedding, maybe a baby. For a minute, it felt real. But that sweet phase never lasted long. It was around then that he started controlling me more obviously. The way I dressed, the makeup I wore all under his microscope. He'd say, you look trashy with red lipstick, wipe it off. Or he'd make me change outfits before we went out to meet his friends. At first, he framed it as love. I just want you to look classy, babe. But the more he did it, the smaller I felt. Sometimes he'd come home drunk and collapse on the couch. One night, his phone lit up with a message from another woman this time, full of hearts and late-night secrets. When I confronted him, he turned it back on me. "You're insecure. You don't trust me. That's your problem, not mine." He called me dramatic, paranoid, needy. And I believed him for a while, because every time I got angry, he'd flip the script so fast I'd start to wonder if I really was the problem. Maybe I really was too emotional, too demanding. The more he slipped up, the more he made me pay for his mistakes. When he got drunk and embarrassed me in front of friends, he'd say I made him feel small. When he snapped at me for asking where he was, he'd say it was because I was suffocating him. And the worst part, I started apologizing for his anger, just like I'd seen my mother do for my father so many years ago. The walls of that apartment became my prison. I was living with a man who'd threaten me, cheat on me, humiliate me, but then kiss my forehead at night and whisper about the family we'd build someday. I clung to those whispers like a life raft, too scared to admit they were empty. I told myself it would get better once we were engaged, once we were married, once we had kids. But the truth is, nothing was ever enough for him. And no matter how much I gave, he always found a way to break me down a little more. Things got worse after we got engaged. He'd planned it like some grand surprise, invited his family from out of state, rented a room at a fancy restaurant. Everyone thought it was the happiest moment of my life. But what they didn't know was that a week before that, he'd shoved me so hard against our apartment wall I could barely breathe. He'd been drunk that night, celebrating moving into our dream place. I'd asked him when his friends planned to leave so we could go out for our anniversary. He snapped. In an instant, the sweet boyfriend was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes burned with a rage I'd never seen before. He grabbed my neck, pinned me to the wall, and hissed, "This is how it's gonna be. You keep pushing me, you'll regret it. And since you won't shut up about a ring, guess what? I bought your damn ring." I stood there frozen, feeling his hand pressing into my skin, wondering how I'd gotten here. But the next morning, he acted like it never happened. He laughed, made me breakfast, told me I was his everything. He handed me the ring like it was proof he loved me, and I put it on. We told everyone we were engaged. We threw the party. I posed for pictures, forcing a smile while my stomach churned. I wanted so badly to believe that the violence was a one-time thing, that the sweet, caring man was the real version of him. But I knew deep down I was lying to myself. After the engagement, I moved more of my things into the apartment. But when moving day came, he refused to lift a finger. He said, "Why should I hurt my back? You're strong enough to handle it." So I packed boxes, carried plants and suitcases up 3 flights of stairs, alone. I kept telling myself it was fine, that once we settled in, he'd change. We'd build the life we'd dreamed about. But every promise he made came with strings. I wasn't allowed to bring much from my old place because he said my stuff was old and cheap. Everything had to be his furniture, his taste, his rules. I even left behind my old bed and most of my kitchen stuff, taking only what I could carry. My dog, my clothes, a few pieces that felt like mine. At first, there was a lull, a fake calm. We cooked dinners together, watched movies on our secondhand couch, talked about names for our future kids. But underneath, I felt the tension coil tighter every day. The smallest thing could set him off: a smudge on the counter, a stray dog hair on the floor. I'd scrub and clean until my hands were raw, only for him to point out something I missed and make me feel like I'd failed again. The man who once said I was perfect now found flaws in everything I did, and somehow every time he put me down, I believed I deserved it. I'd gone from dreaming about a family to living like a prisoner in my own home, tiptoeing around his moods, pretending everything was fine so nobody would see the truth. I was slowly disappearing. The more time passed, the clearer it became. Nothing I did was ever enough. I could keep the apartment spotless, cook his favorite meals, wear what he wanted me to wear, and still, he'd find something to break me down. He started drinking more heavily again. It was always the same pattern: a bad day at work, a few drinks to take the edge off, then hours of anger and accusations. One night, I was working late from home when he called me, slurring his words. He was at some bar a few blocks away, too drunk to get home on his own. I dropped everything, got in my car, and drove to pick him up. When I walked in, he could barely stand, but his phone buzzed in his pocket, another message from another woman. I knew the name. He'd worked with her, casually mentioned her a few times, always saying she was like a sister. But the messages told a different story, flirty, secretive, full of private jokes. When I asked him about it the next morning, he gaslit me again. Are you serious right now? After I gave you all my passwords? If I was cheating, you'd never know about it. Think, Emily. You're too smart to fall for your own insecurities. And like an idiot, I did. I let it go. I blamed myself for being paranoid. I blamed my own gut for telling me something was wrong. But when the signs kept showing up, more secret messages, late nights, excuses, the truth was impossible to ignore. By then, we were deep in financial ties. The apartment lease was in my name. We just bought a car together. He made sure every dream I had came with chains. If we buy this car, babe, we'll be one step closer to our future. Just sign the papers. So I did. And when he cheated, when he pushed me, when he screamed at me until I crumbled, I'd look at those payments and think, how do I get out? Every time I tried to leave, he'd beg me to stay, promising to get help, swearing it would never happen again. He'd spend a few days sober, take me to dinner, tell me how much he loved me. I'd believe it, because the alternative, starting over with nothing, felt too big to face. I remember the first time he threatened to kill himself if I left. He'd call me in the middle of the night, drunk and sobbing. If you go, I'll drive this car into a truck. I'll kill myself, and it'll be your fault. I'd sit there on the floor of our bathroom crying into a towel so he wouldn't hear me sob. I started to believe his life really did depend on me. I was exhausted working my job, paying our bills, cleaning up his messes, trying to keep him from driving drunk, trying to keep him from killing himself, trying to keep myself from falling apart. I barely recognized my own reflection. I stopped doing my nails, stopped caring about my hair. I'd always been so put together, so full of life, but now I just felt hollow. And still, I stayed. Because when you're trapped in it, you think maybe if you just love them harder, they'll finally see how good you are and stop breaking you. It's hard to explain how slow and sneaky the breaking down really was. I used to think abuse was only bruises and black eyes, but it's not. It's waking up every day with your stomach in knots, bracing for what might set him off next. It's living in constant fear of saying the wrong thing, wearing the wrong outfit, breathing the wrong way. The nights were the worst. He'd come home drunk, or worse, he'd disappear for hours, not answering calls. Sometimes I'd wait up till 3 a.m., convinced he'd gotten in an accident or hoping he had, because at least then he wouldn't be coming home looking for a fight. When he did come back, he'd reek of booze and cigarettes, slam the door, and find something to pick apart. A dish in the sink, a hair on the couch, my voice when I asked if he was okay. If I argued back, he'd flip it on me. You know how to push my buttons. You know exactly what to say to piss me off. You're the reason I get like this. I started to believe it was true, that if I could just be quieter, smaller, better, he'd stop exploding. He controlled everything: my clothes, my hair, who I talked to, what I spent money on. I stopped buying makeup because he'd tell me I looked cheap. I stopped wearing dresses because he said I looked desperate. I stopped seeing my friends because he said they were bad influences. The isolation was slow, but it worked. One day I woke up and realized I hadn't had a girls' night out in over a year. My phone hardly rang anymore. I distanced myself from everyone, too ashamed to admit what was happening, too exhausted to pretend things were fine. He ruined every special date. My birthday, Valentine's Day, holidays all ended in fights or cold silences. One year, he went on a work trip the week of my birthday. He promised he'd be back in time to celebrate. Instead, he ignored my calls for days, partying all night with coworkers, posting photos online while I sat at home staring at a half-eaten cake. When he finally got back, I tried to pretend everything was normal because that was easier than another fight. But that night, as I lay next to him in bed, tears streaming into my pillow, he turned over and said, "Stop crying. I have work tomorrow. You're so dramatic." I knew I was losing myself. I'd stand in front of the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. I'd gained weight, my hair was a mess, my eyes looked hollow. The girl I used to be, ambitious, lively, always laughing, felt like a ghost. Sometimes I'd find old photos of myself on my phone, all dressed up, smiling with friends. I'd stare at them for hours, wondering how I'd ever find my way back to her, wondering if I even could. But part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd remember how to love me like he used to before the drinks, the threats, the broken promises. By the time I reached my breaking point, I felt like I was living with a stranger I feared more than I loved. The emotional violence had turned into moments of physical threat, a shove against the wall, a tight grip on my arm, a slap that was just a joke. He always swore he didn't remember any of it the next day. You know how I get when I drink. That wasn't me. But it was him. It was always him. The final straw came on a Monday. I was at work, trying to focus on a project I'd been leading for months. Around 5 p.m., he texted me that he'd come pick me up, said he wanted to make things up to me after a weekend fight. I should have known better, but I still hoped maybe we'd talk. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe this would be the time he meant it. When I got in the car, I smelled the alcohol immediately. His eyes were glassy, his voice slurred, and my heart sank. He started driving fast through downtown traffic, weaving in and out, yelling at me that I was ruining his life. He screamed, "Your mom deserves to bury you. I'll kill you tonight. You think you know me? You don't know a damn thing." Every red light felt like a second borrowed from death. I begged him to slow down, to pull over, but he just laughed a wild, terrifying laugh and floored the gas pedal, swerving past pedestrians and nearly clipping a cyclist. I remember gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles turned white, praying under my breath that I wouldn't die in that car. When he finally pulled into our apartment complex, the side of the car was smashed in. I hadn't even seen him hit anything, but there it was, metal bent, paint scraped off. I jumped out, heart pounding, and he stumbled inside like nothing happened. While he passed out on the bed, I grabbed his phone, and there it was, a photo of him in bed with an escort, taken hours before he came to pick me up. All my illusions shattered at once. The cheating, the lies, the threats, it was all real, all happening, all my reality. But even then, I didn't leave that night. Instead, I sat awake in the dark, watching him snore, replaying every promise he'd ever made. I felt numb, like I'd lost the ability to cry. A few days later, we went on a vacation we'd already paid for because that's what it's like when you're trapped. You go through the motions pretending you're okay because the alternative, admitting you're not, feels impossible. On that trip, I looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing under a golden sunset, and made a silent vow. When we get back, I'm done. This is the last time I'll ever share a bed with this man. When we got home, I told him it was over. He stared at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the one who'd done all the damage. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. When I finally ended it for good, it wasn't some dramatic exit. It was a quiet, desperate promise to myself. I will not die here. I will not let him kill who I am. We still lived under the same roof for 2 more months after that. 2 months of him pounding on my bedroom door at 2 a.m., screaming insults through the walls, calling me worthless, ridiculous, ungrateful. 2 months of me locking myself in the spare room, pressing my back to the door while he rattled the handle, daring me to come out and face him. I'd sit on the floor, listening to his rage echo down the hallway. Some nights, I'd record it on my phone, proof for myself later that I wasn't imagining the horror. Some nights, I'd write in a notebook, if I don't make it out, at least someone will know what he did. But during the day, I wore my mask like nothing was wrong. I'd show up to work, do my job, laugh with my coworkers, then go home to the storm. Nobody knew. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my friends. The shame was too heavy. How do you say out loud, I'm living with a man who might kill me, but I don't know how to leave? The last night we were together, he came home drunk, again. He stood in the doorway of my room, half smiling, half sneering. He said, no one will ever love you like I did. You'll be nothing without me. And for the first time, I didn't believe him. I moved out the next morning. I left behind furniture, a closet full of clothes, half my savings. I didn't care. I wanted my freedom more than any of those things. I got an old apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I bought a used bed on Facebook Marketplace. I sat on the floor that first night with my dog curled up next to me and cried tears of relief. Of course, healing didn't come overnight. Some days I still wake up sweating from dreams of him yelling in my face. Loud noises make my heart race. Some days I catch myself second guessing every choice I make, wondering if I'm being too much or too dramatic because that's what he drilled into me for so long. But I'm not who he said I was. I'm learning that now. I'm the girl who survived, the woman who packed her life into boxes and left the nightmare behind. The woman who found herself again in small things, buying flowers for my kitchen table, walking my dog at sunrise, laughing too loud with girlfriends over brunch. And now, every time a woman messages me on my little support page telling me her story, asking how I did it, I remind her, one day at a time, one piece at a time. One tiny spark of hope is enough to get you through the darkest nights. He doesn't get to keep me caged anymore. He doesn't get to write my ending. I do. And my story is just beginning. Today, it's been 5 months since I left him for good. Some mornings, I still feel that familiar fear twist in my stomach when a car door slams too loud outside, or when I hear a man's angry voice on the street. But now I know. I'm not that trapped woman anymore. The first few weeks alone were the hardest. I'd stare at my reflection and barely recognize myself, the dull eyes, the tired skin, the way my shoulders hunched like I was bracing for another blow. I felt ashamed, broken, like I'd lost years I could never get back. But in that emptiness, I found my freedom. Slowly, I built a new routine, one small act of self-love at a time. I started doing my nails again, bright colors that made me smile when I typed on my keyboard. I bought candles that smelled like vanilla and fresh linen. I rescued a little plant from the clearance shelf and promised I'd keep it alive, a tiny reminder that I could bloom too. I went back to therapy, opened up to my friends, and realized I'd been carrying a secret too heavy for one person to hold. I learned that there are thousands of women like me, women who stay quiet because they're ashamed, because they're afraid no one will understand. But when we speak out, something incredible happens. We find each other. That's why I share my story now. That's why I made my little support page online, not because I want pity, but because I want another woman out there sitting alone in a locked bedroom with tears in her eyes to know she's not alone. If you're listening to this and your gut tells you you're not safe, listen to that voice. I promise you your life is worth fighting for. You are not what he called you. You are not the mess he said you were. You are not dramatic, crazy, too much. You are human. You are worthy of love that doesn't hurt. Take one step today. Maybe that means telling a friend. Maybe it means calling a hotline. Maybe it means looking in the mirror and remembering who you were before the cage. Just take one step. Because freedom isn't some sudden rescue. It's 1,000 tiny choices to believe you deserve better. And when you make it out, when you breathe that first lungful of air that tastes like peace, you'll know you saved yourself. If you're living through something like this, you don't have to do it alone. Join our community. We share real stories, real hope, and real help. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back every week for stories that remind you you're stronger than you think. You've got this, one day at a time.